My name is O.C. Greenway with the Warzone Freelance project, exhibition project. Tonight's discussion will be on the future of freelancing, future of freelance journalism. And once again, I really appreciate you guys, everybody, for coming out. And I hope you guys have a chance to come during the day and see the exhibition and come say hi in the morning tomorrow. I would like to have everybody introduce themselves. Each one of these lovely people represent a organization that supports and works with the Warzone Freelance project. So if you guys could say something about yourself so people know who you are. Thank you. Starting with you, John Paul.
Jean-Paul? Okay. My name is Jean-Paul Martos. I'm the EU correspondent of the Cubi to Protect journalist, CPJ. I'm a journalist. I mean, I'm a foreign affairs columnist for Le Soir in Brussels, and I'm a writer on war correspondent. My latest book just went out 2 weeks ago. It's about the history of Martha Gellhorn, Hemingway, and all those people in the Battle of the Bulge, 1944, and a comparison with not freelancers, war correspondents, fully paid war correspondents, 1944 and today.
My name is James Brabazon, and talking to Jean-Paul makes me feel nostalgic for something that I never actually experienced. It's extraordinary. I'm a freelance camera operator, producer and director. Make current affairs programs mainly for Channel 4 in the UK, a bit of stuff for HBO in the States. I'm also a trustee of the Rory Peck Trust, and the trust exists to help promote and assist freelancers and their families. Last year we gave out 200 assistance grants to freelancers and put on 43 trauma workshops and gave 45 bursaries for hostile environments training. And with my other hat on, I am the commissioning editor for Channel 4 News' Foreign Film Fund, which exists to promote and commission interesting and innovative work from freelancers around the world. That's me.
My name's Vaughan Smith. I'm the founder of the Frontline Club, this place where you are now at, which is in its origins are freelance. It's dedicated to 9 freelancers who were killed in the course of their work, who I worked with as a freelancer, and also I was the agent of the organisation called Frontline News Television in the 90s. Also, I'm a founding director of something called the Frontline Freelance Register, which I'm sure we'll be talking about, which is a freelance self-help group and safety group, and am about to launch an equivalent for local journalists. That's me.
Yeah, my name is Benjamin Hiller. I'm a freelance photojournalist and writer from Germany. I represent tonight the Warzone Freelance exhibition, so I'm one of the core members who founded the whole project. Yeah, so probably some of you were yesterday already here. For those who were not here, the exhibition is an idea to promote education on what is freelancing nowadays. Not only from international journalists, but one main point is local journalists and so-called fixers in different countries. And we want to highlight the perils we face nowadays, but also opportunities, what is going on. My own main focus is since 2008 the Middle East and the Kurdish question, and that's it. I think more will come in the discussion.
My name is John D. McHugh. I'm a freelance photojournalist and filmmaker of many years. Worked nearly a decade in Afghanistan and lots of other nice places as well. I'm also the founder of a news agency called Verify Media, which is dedicated to representing freelance journalists, both international and national, and local people who are living in the middle of a story and who want to tell it themselves. I'm also a board member of the FFR, the Frontline Freelance Register, which shall be called the FFR for the rest of the night. And Vaughan has stolen my thunder on that, so I will follow on from there.
I hope you guys are really impressed with our panel. We got some great people to come out. First off, I want to thank Rosa Luxemburg Foundation for financially helping us to make this exhibition possible, and obviously the Frontline Club for their amazing work they do, and for the invitation, the support for us to be here. Let's just jump in. You guys want to just jump into this? I think we're all ready. So the topic tonight is the future of freelance journalism. I know it's not an exciting topic. I hope you all can feel this out in some of these questions. The first question, I'm going to ask some questions and pass it down the panel and take their take on each question. So the first question I have is, after this year, last year and the year before that, of freelance journalism and kind of this dark shadow that has been cast over it, both security-wise and with the recent issues in the Middle East and the loss of several different freelance journalists, and the agencies basically not supporting or backing any work that freelance journalists do. I just wanted to ask the panel if they had any thoughts on a foreshadowing of any issues that will definitely come into light and take place in 2016 for freelance journalism as a whole.
Right, looking at me for.
If anybody wants to jump on that, yeah.
For a small question.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, mostly, you know, what's your opinion on this? I mean, you guys have seen this. You guys have been obviously around a lot longer than most of us in the Warzone Freelance Project have. So, what now, man? Like, what 2016 is coming? What? Go ahead, John.
Okay, I'll jump in here. So unlike a lot of my colleagues in the industry, and I suspect on this panel, I'm pretty upbeat about the future of freelance journalism, which is why I sold my home and used the money to set up a news agency to support freelancers, because otherwise I'm fucked. But seriously, I think that there are huge opportunities out there for freelancers. I think the industry has completely changed, and I think if you're hoping to get a contract with the BBC or to support one of the old and the legacy names, I think you're barking up the wrong tree. I think you need to look at what's happening with BuzzFeed, with Vice, with Mashable. I think you need to look at instant articles on Facebook. I think you need to look at the way tech is completely disrupting the news industry like every other industry, and watch as the old dinosaurs die, but don't try and do business with them. Look at the opportunities out there. There are lots and lots of people in the world who want to know what's going on. Look at the engagement levels on Facebook for news organizations. So there are lots of opportunities for freelancers. I think the biggest threat to freelancers is everybody's trying to do it on their own. I think everybody's trying to cut deals with organizations that say they'll pay them £25 for something or £30 for an exclusive on something. I think that lots of the major news organizations have done a huge disservice to freelancers by saying, we won't take your content if you go to X, Y, or Z, because freelancers don't give a shit, they're going anyway. I went into Afghanistan when it was really difficult to sell content. I didn't go there to try and make a fortune. I went there because I believed there was a story to be told, and I really, really wanted to be there. And I think we're going to see a big shift in the way freelancers do business, but I think there's lots and lots of opportunity out there.
Yeah, I think there's a growing awareness about the role that freelancers play in journalism. I mean, awareness among the journalist professions, that really, when you see the number of journalists that are freelancers, I mean, international news, I mean, it has been growing in the last decade, but also, which is also a barometer, the number of journalists that have been killed. I mean, the number of freelancers has also been rising. And we have to think, I mean, at CPJ, I mean, we're not a specialized organization focused only on freelancers, but we devote increasing time and resources to freelancers because they are really the most vulnerable part of the profession. I mean, I would say even in terms of being a journalist, but also in terms of being exposed and vulnerable. At the same time, I mean, we see the question of freelancing, I mean, as a continuum between a full-time journalist, mainstream, traditional, conventional, up to people that are, what we say, committing acts of journalism. They're not journalists, really, but they're providing information from war zones like Syria, rather. And so how do we integrate in terms of protection, I mean, all those people that are playing a role today in the flow of information? It comes from what I said, I mean, people that are full-timers. Then we say freelancer, but what do we mean by freelancers? I mean, we have the freelancers that are the ones that are, I mean, here, I mean, to some extent, that are trying to be full-time journalists, but not linked by contract to a news organization. At the same time, we have increasingly, we have a number of people that are they would not say, I am a journalist, but they are contributing to the flow of information. And there are two or three categories. Yeah, first of all, I mean, the people working for information NGOs like Human Rights Watch and for transparency. I used to be the international press director for Human Rights Watch, so I'm still a member of the advisory board. We increasingly act as journalists. We are in areas, I mean, our people are in areas where journalists even don't go. Central African Republic, for instance. You see journalists there? No. You see people from Human Rights Watch or Amnesty International covering issues that are. And then you have people that are people working, not the fixers, but people working like journalists, sometimes partisan journalists, I mean, war zones like Syria providing information. Then you have people that are just, at some moment, providing information. It could be professors, they could be academics, but they provide something. And so how do we assure the safety of all these people that are information doers, information providers? This is the major issue. And within that, we have the question of course, freelancers as such. I mean, people that are trying to earn a living, be respected, be protected, and have a tough assignment, really. And this is where we have some time to be perhaps non-traditional. In my country, for instance, in Belgium, if you are a journalist, a freelancer, you have to have more than the majority of your earnings coming from journalism. You cannot do advertising. I know some photojournalists or correspondents that have been they have lost their press card because they have been working as doing advertisement. Photo advertising, for instance, just to earn the money to be able to go to a war zone and do what they wanted to do. So we have to think quite openly today about so many issues, and that's why I find that the moment that's before us, I mean, it's fascinating. It's scary sometimes, but it's fascinating. And I would love to be a young journalist, 25 years, as I was when I covered as a freelancer Central America in the 1970s and 80s, because I find that I'm optimistic to say what I meant to summarize. I think there is a great perspective in front of us because of this awareness and because freelancing does correspond to the new, I would say, to the new economy of the news. And so we have to work on reality, and this is the reality.
So follow on from that, really. I think to talk about the future of freelance journalism is a misnomer, really. I mean, what we're really talking about is the future of journalism. Mm-hmm. It's not possible to separate out the two things, I don't think, because the future of journalism is the future of freelance journalism. So, and if you sort of consider what sort of John Paul's just said, of all the spectrum of everyone that is contained within the freelance community, people who are providing everything from extremely unverified, dubiously credible partisan reports through to the sort of pinnacle of investigative journalism, all coming from freelance journalists. I think that underlines the extreme difficulty, and I would argue impossibility, of constructing bodies that encompass all of them. And I just think it's an illusion to believe that we can. I suppose what I would most like to actually try and answer the question, for 2016, the pressing issues that face freelancers, it's a case of same shit, different year. I mean, it's not like suddenly in 2016 we have a whole new series of issues to deal with that we haven't dealt with for the last decade. It's still very pressing and frankly depressing. If you've been to these talks before at the Frontline Club, I would imagine that what Vaughan is going to say is not massively divergent from what we've all been banging on about for years. And what I mean, I suppose what I would most like to see is a kind of revolution of consciousness in freelancers themselves. You are, and I'm sure there are many freelancers in this room, you are the future of journalism. So it's a question of how it is that you can behave in a way which is responsible, which is sustainable, which is productive, and which is safe. And the key issues of how you monetize the internet, how you monetize new forms of distribution are key. Yeah, it's in a sense we are in the golden age of journalism. We have more people providing more journalism being consumed by more people than ever before in the history of the world. But that does not make a good living for a very large number of people practicing it. So how do we monetize that? How do we ensure that people not only produce good work, but are paid for it? In the last 48 hours, I've spoken to 2 young freelancers, both of whom are doing really good work, and both of whom have given substantial amounts of that work away for free. And that's something which we have to really profoundly try and kick against and find a way of working out. And I'd say just in the other really important thing which is directly connected to that is you were saying about what is a freelance journalist, what do you think of as a freelance journalist? And you know, there's a temptation really, you think of what you see in the mirror. So when I think of a freelance journalist, I think of someone that looks a bit like me or everyone else on this panel and most of the people in this room. But that's also an illusion. The vast majority of freelancers operating globally, whether in a frontline war zone capacity or not, are local freelancers, a vast amount of them from the developing world. And it's how you draw together us, here, me, and actually those people doing the vast bulk of the actual work on the ground together. That for me is the key challenge of not just this coming year, but of this decade.
I agree with James on much what he says. Certainly that we will no doubt discuss today much that's been discussed before and no one's done anything to fix it. So that I agree. Where I don't agree, the changes that I see happening is I see freelancers, rather like tonight, getting together and organising things, trying to, there are some Facebook groups, all sorts of things. There's FFR, which I want to talk about. I think it's incredibly important that we do try to fix things ourselves. Freelancers, we've got a difficult relationship with the news industry. Sure, we'd all like the perfect internet model, so would the news industry. But we don't have it. It may come. But in its absence, we need a good relationship with the news industry, and freelancers need to be paid. And I think this is something that, if we're going to change, we need to get together, be more proactive, work together, mentor each other, join in the sort of groups that we can, and start initiatives to try to shape the news industry or the environment we work in to be more suitable for us. More receptive to freelance material where, things, there are so many issues that we have, from credits through to the main one, obviously being paid. There's the recognition, and though there's been a lot of work done by the Rory Peck Trust to address some of those things, we still are being paid like shit. And it's always was ever thus. I mean, when I was much more active 25 years ago, we were still being paid shit. So the only real difference is the internet and how we use that. And so there are differences. I would suggest that unless we get together and, as I say, I use this word, shape the industry a little bit, which I think we can now, because we shouldn't underestimate the role that freelancers play in news gathering. It's increasing, it's very important. The people gaining experience in conflicts today are freelance. They're not actually your employed, our employed colleagues. So I think what we've got to learn to do, and historically, and perhaps by nature, we are really bad at it, is get together, collaborate. Now, we can talk to each other, we can work together, we can mentor each other better than the people in the industry can as a whole. But we're really bad at understanding how the industry works and working with it, because we haven't really had jobs, most of us, and we don't really understand these organisations. So we've got to do a bit better at that. But the other, I think, really important thing is we've got to get our voice, and I think FFR helps do that. There are 512 members of FFR, the Frontline Freelance Register. Now, the Frontline Freelance Register only exists to help what we would call international, people who travel to another country to report conflict. Now, I have just managed to raise some money, which is wonderful, not very much, to actually do an exercise to go to 6 countries and speak to local journalists, local freelancers and fixers, and talk to them and see is there an FFR-type organisation we can start for them? Now, I don't know the answer to that, and maybe none of us do yet, and maybe it'll look very, very different. But I do passionately believe that what FFR is doing and what we need to do somehow is have a voice. We have not had a voice since I've been doing this. And as a consequence, that's partly why we've got such a bad deal, because we're so disparate and we don't and suspicious, and we've got to work together and collaborate to shape the industry if we want it to be one that actually allows us to work. And I say this pay thing is really important. I will finish. I just want to say one thing. It's not just about the fact that we're not getting paid fairly for what we do, and as professional people we should be paid professional wages. It's also, it robs us of the money we need to do the next trip. It's undermining our journalism. And that's why we're here. That's why we're taking poor wages anyway. It's because we want to do journalism. We don't have the money to go on our next trip because we haven't been paid for the last one. So, we have to work to address that, and other things that we think contribute to it. And we're only going to do that by organising together.
Yeah. So, most of the things were already said, and here are a big organization, so I will try to put in my perspective as a freelancer. The last time I was in Iraq was in June. Since then we work on our project, so no traveling anymore. And for example, because it was talked about pay, we did it unpaid up to now, and even trying to gather the resources to get it going. So I think payment is for sure a really important issue, because I often meet now younger, I'm not that old, but let's say the next generation of freelance journalists. And they get an offer from a bigger newspaper, and then they say, yeah, we would take your stuff, like your article, but we can't pay you anything. But our name is good, and they do it. And that's a big problem, because you shouldn't do it. You can't sell yourself under value. And these are things which often are not taught, I think. Like, it's coming back generation by generation. And one of the problems is, I think that those who study, like in universities and colleges, that's missing, these things. What is a conflict zone? How do you sell yourself? How do you don't destroy the prices on the market because you give it for free and think, yeah, in 2-3 years I will get the money. And we had exactly an example on that for Germany. A friend of mine, he's like doing 2-3 years now as a photojournalist. He got arrested in a foreign country, and we managed to get him free. And he studies at a university photojournalism. And we wanted to talk about it. I asked, can I do a lecture exactly on those topics, like safety network, etc., and how you handle it? And the university reacted on that and said, no, we don't want you there, because with your talk you would encourage people, young students, to go to conflict zones. Which is totally insane in that sense, because if somebody wants to go somewhere, he goes. And you need really this morality and this idea to bring these ideas and the really important issues to the universities, to the study places, at least one semester, and teach them that. Because without it, they will repeat the same mistakes. I did the same mistakes also when I started.
So you're saying, so just jump in here. So are you saying that most of the issues that could be affecting current journalism, freelance journalism, is coming from colleges who aren't preparing their students properly before they head out to the field?
I think definitely, like some of them definitely, like with safety issues, with how do you even go there, with networking, with how do you keep your money together or try to sell yourself properly.
Medical training.
Yeah, medical training, definitely. And you could get a far bigger impact if that would be really properly taught all over the world in these colleges and universities. The organizations are there. They only need to be invited on a regular basis.
And that takes me to collaborating. Yeah. Vaughn, you said something about collaboration. We need to collaborate, we need to organize. And I'm pretty sure that's been talked about on this panel before. So I'm curious, with these great organizations like CPJ, Roy Peck Trust, every FFR, what's holding everybody back from collaborating? What's holding everybody back from saying, let's organize and let's really get this together and deal with these issues?
Well, I can answer. I mean, it's quite complicated, really. First of all, I think it's largely freelancers' fault. In the past, we haven't got organised. I mean, what is the Rory Peck Trust? Well, it's an incredibly valuable organisation that's 20 years old, that I certainly helped found right at the beginning. There was 3 or 4 of us, and was was part of the director for a decade. But it is essentially a charity that exists to recognise and help freelancers, and really it's an industry-run charity. It's not the freelance voice. It's incredibly useful, but it isn't. We need more. We need our voice, because it's essentially the industry's voice about freelancers, and really those people in the industry who give a shit. But it isn't everything, and because we haven't had anything, a voice or really a seat at the table for all this time. And actually, interestingly, there used to be freelance agencies. There was my old agency, there was an Insight, there was the 3 or 4 agencies in the 90s. They collapsed because the financial model wasn't strong enough. And they were a voice. But they've gone, and this is video. And also you've seen what's happened to photographic agents over the last 20 years. So essentially, if we can fix that voice, then we have an opportunity to actually be listened to and make some changes. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, sorry, and I'm here to talk about FF4, but I'm going to talk about verified media because I absolutely
you can't do that.
Well, I agree with Vaughan, and I mean, I've put my money where my mouth is, but we are trying to organise people. Now, I mean, if you're getting a sort of a union idea, which I think we'll come to, I don't believe that will work, because freelancers are too fucking cantankerous to work together. But we can work in groups. We can come together in smaller groups. But coming together to try and change things, we've introduced a business model which is very simple. When we sell content, freelancers sending stuff in from all over the world, and when we sell it, we ask our clients to pay at that point with a credit card. Pay for the content. If you want to eat my lollipop, pay before you leave the shop. Okay? Now, what's really interesting is the digital natives that I mentioned earlier. They're like, yeah, cool, thank you very much. You go to Fleet Street and you talk about this. I mean, I can't use the language that's been used. I mean, I've had people screaming down the phone at me, talking about my parentage and my nationality, and like, I mean, it was like one guy. I was like traveling back about 25 years in time. I ain't paying with a fucking credit card. I ain't doing this and I ain't doing that. Send me the pictures or send me the video, and we'll pay you when we feel like it, sort of thing. So, you know, this is what we're up against. Not everyone's like, but there are organizations like this. But we come together, and this is one thing that I'm trying to do. I'm talking about mentoring and safety, and I'm trying to build an agency like the ones that disappeared. But the one thing is, I believe we've got the business model right, because for too long, like I've been a freelancer for years. I used to make films like £20,000, £25,000 that I would fund, and then chase around and get the money to go and make the next film. We've all done the same thing. I didn't let it go for free, but I certainly extended terms of credit that no bank would. And we've got to get over that. But we've got to work together, and we've got to talk to each other. And I go into universities and colleges a lot, and I talk about this and try and explain to people the value of their content and how they get absolutely destroyed by letting it go for free, or handing it over and not having a proper contract, not having a plan of how to get paid. And we have to work on this, but I don't think we'll be able to do it in one mass worldwide university or union. That won't work.
So, go ahead.
Just to respond to Vaughan there, and hearing some of the reasons why freelancers find it hard to organise with each other, is I would say that the Rory Peck Trust fulfills an extremely valuable role, which is it gives money to help freelancers who otherwise can't continue to work, or support their families who otherwise would not be able to put food on the table. It is a very useful function that is performed, and it performs the function that it's set out to achieve extremely well. It is not an advocacy group, and has never been set out to be one. It helps people afford medical training or hostile environments training. It's not set out to be an industry pressure group. Yes, it's funded from inside of the industry, but that money is redistributed to freelancers in various and very helpful ways. I would say that and it's not a case that the industry should have one organisation that does everything. There is lots of room for multiple organisations who have different functions and perform them well. So it's not a question of exclusivity, it's a question of multiple people doing multiple things that help. And what I would say is, why can't we organise? Vaughan, and you just hit the nail on the head, it's because we're cantankerous bastards. I can be careful which hat I'm speaking with at the moment because I get in much trouble. But basically, I don't want to be in your gang. I'm a gang of one. That's why I'm a freelance. I don't work as a freelance. I don't work in an office because that's not what I want to do. I do okay. Thanks very much.
But James, you wouldn't be forced to be part of a group if there was one. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but I don't want to. But I don't want to be.
You don't
part
have
of
the
one.
option.
I have absolutely no interest in being part of one because
and I think that's
freelancers have. Most freelancers you talk to have informal networks that they rely on for support, whether that's through friends or colleagues. What I would say is that there's been a traditional and enduring clash, frankly, struggle between the established news industry and whatever that is. Hunter S. Thompson nailed that quite clearly. I won't read that quote out. And freelancers. But actually, given now, as John Paul said, and we've talked about already, the vast number of freelancers in the industry, lots and lots of people are coming into more senior and executive positions in the news industry who have previously been freelancers. At the moment, myself included. And that generates and will generate over the next generation, I think, an important change, because you will finally have people dealing with freelancers who themselves have been freelance, and therein a key difference.
Can I sneak something in real quick? I mean, with the topic of a union or organization or something like that, like you were saying, the Roy Peck Trust has a specific role, like a very specific direction and role. So in the instance of, let's say hypothetically, everybody decide to play ball or whatever you want to call it. I mean, each one of these organizations will have a part, like a body, in that sense. Like nobody can do, So I'm curious, like, do you feel like if these major organizations that you guys have also created, I mean, if they ever came together, would they create a body, a functional body?
Can I address this? Because a lot of the work's already been done on this. I didn't quite finish what I was explaining last time. Essentially, the organizations that have existed or that actually do something to support freelancers, and there are quite a few of them, so 20 or 25 that have some sort of role, whether it be a training company that offers some discount on its training courses, or somebody that does this, that, or the other. They exist in an environment that is itself starved of cash. There are not many donors giving money to these people, these organizations. So they are instinctively competitive themselves. So that's the environment that we have to work in, where the organizations out there trying to do some good are struggling to exist in the first place, to be quite honest, particularly in this country, where it's harder to raise money for things than it is in the States. So essentially, if freelancers don't organize and try and shape their environment, it's not going to happen. With regards to a union, please remember when you're thinking about a union that a union is a legal body, and it's a very specific legal body that many governments, in fact most governments, have a set of laws surrounding. So to start a journalist union is not necessarily, I would suggest, the right sort of thing to do today. There are already unions. For FFR, which is a representative body, be very clear, what is a union? This is a representative body, but it's not strictly legally a union. It's an association. And that's because it's the most versatile of organizations you can really have. And anyway, this isn't about what type of organization one should have, but be careful with the union. Now, I went to see the NUJ, and they were terrified about the prospect of the Frontline Freelance Register becoming a union because it's a very competitive space anyway. Now, we can do everything we need to do as an association. We can issue press cards. We can, for example, I can list the sort of things. Yes, we can. We can. We can. What is a press card? We can. Of course you can. People think that you can't. You absolutely can.
People will tell you you can't.
Yeah, but you can. Yes. And we will. We will issue press cards. What we've done, for example, for freelancers is we're about to launch a training standards scheme whereby there'll be qualifications for safety training. At the moment, you can't actually get a qualification. It's amazing, but the industry, having not organized itself in such a way to deliver safety qualifications, like, you've done this type of course with that type of syllabus, and we recognize it, because they've all got different courses, hardly encourage freelance safety, do they? So we're fixing that. we've put in place and are about to launch something that we've got 70 or 80 organisations to subscribe to, which will give freelancers and anybody in the industry the opportunity to get a course, whether you pay for it yourself or you're lucky enough to get a Roy Peck grant, that will have a qualification that everybody will recognise, hopefully, in time. Now that is a little building block. This is the sort of thing we need to do. The other thing, for example, is, and FFR were absolutely instrumental in this, we absolutely made it happen. Recently, out of what we have put out on our website about terms and conditions we recommend for employing or engaging freelancers in, and we identified 4 different natures or types of engagement for freelancers, what the conditions surrounding one of them are commissioning a freelancer. And we've got a lot more work to do. We've got over 70 organisations to sign up for that, and it basically followed our text and was amended from our original text. So we are already doing a shitload. It's not seen because we haven't got the time to tell everybody because we don't get paid, like you. And so, essentially, there's a hell of a lot that we are actually doing. There's a task force. I was talking about the problem we have of getting all the organisations who do something for freelancers to work together. Well, there's a task force. FFR are at the centre of this task force. In fact, it's got to the point, because we have 518 people on our books, and we can therefore properly represent that number of freelancers, we can actually move things forward in a way they couldn't move forward before. We can give things, we can give a stamp of approval that allows things to happen. It's not been possible before, this type of conversation. I just wanted to explain the sort of things that are possible by organising. So what should you do? Join FFR. Or join this other organisation we're going to start, this other representative body for locals, when we get round to it, when we work out what that looks like.
Just one point, 2 points. First of all, press freedom groups tend to work together quite well. In the sense that everyone has a specific specialization. Freelancers or journalists, or sometimes even between CPJ, for instance, which is New York-based and quite a sort of a Yankee organization, I may say. We have Portes Sans Frontières, which is very much francophone. So you have some shares of the market, I may say. So we work together quite well, especially I work at the EU level, and I can say that most press room groups work together quite well in relation to the EU, the Commission, which funds many projects, by the way. Some of them being funding journalist organizations or individual journalists, even freelancers as well. So there's money at the EU level. I know Brexit is in the air here, but I can tell you there's money in Brussels to help journalists on the ground. As a former editor-in-chief, I have to say, I have 2 questions on this. First of all, is the lack of solidarity between the fully paid, salaried, wage-earning journalists and freelancers. When I was editor-in-chief of a daily paper during the Iraq War in 2003, I really attended meetings where there was a clash between the staff and freelancers, and it's something which is it seems to be quite general. So there's we tend to focus on the owners, on the media owners and the commissioning editors. Yes, sure, certainly. But we should also try to create a real solidarity between every journalist, being freelancer or not, or just full-time journalist. And this is something which we don't do enough. And in terms of the freelancers, I have also another doubt. Should we frame defense of freelancers working as war correspondents on the front line as specifically linked to that? Or should we work, much more broadly, thinking about freelancing more generally? That's an issue. Where are we more powerful? Do we focus on frontline journalists, war correspondents, which is the core of this organization here? I have no conviction. I don't know what to do. But or should we work to have a better status for all freelancers?
I'll be asking the questions right here.
So,
first up, sorry, just to jump in because we're kind of coming close to time. I want to bring in the issue of local freelance journalists, and sure, we have international organizations, and I know you guys are, like you were saying, trying to reach out and protect these people who are in possibly even more grave danger than international freelancers. So maybe we could talk on a little bit what is the most direct and immediate approach to start protecting these people with the organizations that we have established already, or you have, no offense, but what is a direct and immediate way, because these people are, as you know, being kidnapped, killed, you know, in jail right now currently, and et cetera, et cetera. So within this year, is there anything that we could see or that you may be a part of that that we could see happen for local freelancers?
Well, I've already mentioned, so I won't mention again, but I will be going around this year to 5 or 6 countries to talk to local freelancers, try and work out a structure, something FFR-like. But I don't know what that is, because I need to work out what people think could be helpful.
For sure.
I would say that a lot of our work at CPJ is really focused on local journalists, and many of them are freelancers because they're the ones that are really on the front line. That's really something. The journalist assistance program we have is really focused on people that are working locally, because of course 85% of people that have been killed in the last 25 years have been local journalists, by the way. And so most of the efforts we do, it's not the same as perhaps ROIPAC would be doing. We would, for instance, try to have someone get out of the country and relocate someone for a couple of months, helping people, address issues of, lots of issues of resources and protection in the country. But it's true that most of the resources of many organizations today are focused on protecting local journalists, because the figures are there, numbers are there, but also because we know they are providing the raw material of international news.
For me, and I come across a lot of local journalists from a commissioning point of view, people that want to sell their work or they want to be commissioned to make work. And there are key things that need to happen in terms of safety and security training, which is vital, and some inroads are being made in that direction by different groups. But for me, it's also very important that local freelancers understand that there are distinct different markets that people are selling into. There are local freelancers who are working locally and selling into a local market, or who are selling into an international market. And there are issues to do with authenticity and credibility of work that's commissioned by local journalists. And there are thresholds of legal and compliance requirements by international broadcasters which need to be met by local journalists in the same way they need to be met by us. So I would like to see more training and more awareness and more sessions for more opportunities for local journalists to understand what it is that they need to do in order to make their work saleable. If someone comes to me with, secretly filmed footage which looks amazing, but actually the process of filming that footage has broken several key compliance issues for me, I can't buy it, I can't use it. But actually, if I approach the work slightly differently, it could be extremely valuable. Yeah. And I think it's a, like I said at the beginning, it's a kind of revolution of consciousness. It's both a kind of an understanding the value of the work to the industry, but also understanding how to make that work valuable. And and then we get to Jean-Paul's point about the sheer number and diversity of freelance journalists. And then I wonder how you begin to do that. And I think that between the initiatives of the ROIPAC Trust and the Freelance Register, there clearly is progress being made. We are, you've got, 513 people? I mean, we're talking about,
it's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot of people out there globally. You're talking about a global community of thousands and thousands of people. And I was in Syria filming in Kobani last year, while I was there was a small group of freelance photographers who were working, none of whom had medical training, all from European countries, Germany, Belgium, France, none of whom had medical training, none of whom had any medical kit with them, none of whom were insured, none of whom had heard of the ROIPAC Trust, and none of them had heard of the Frontline Club. And this is us. That's you and me, and never mind, people working away in, Abuja or Kandahar. I mean, this is like our core audience. We are still missing. So there's great work being done, but there's a lot more.
So, go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, I want to drop like 2 words, which I think is really important, or what we missed, like strong words. because I often work with local journalists together, of course, on my travels, and a lot of them are friends. I miss often that organizations should be more, or we together should be more proactive, because often we are reactive. React when something happens, something bad happens, but that's too late often. So there's sometimes like this missing of proactive engagement in the side. You talked a bit about it, like training is missing, etc. But we need to push more in this proactive movement. And then, of course, that's a big issue since ever. But like the impunity, of course, CPJ had a big campaign on impunity, because as long as there is this broad impunity everywhere, you can't prosecute the states, you can't prosecute the killers, you can't get them. That will be always a big obstacle to even get like a certain safety for local journalists or anything done. So these are really like these two words or points.
Seems like a really mammoth task.
I mean, a lot of those issues you're dealing with there exist at a state level, which is just not within our capacity to immediately affect that as much as that might be desirable in some cases.
Exactly, like it's a state level, it's a local issue, it's a cultural issue sometimes as well. But just like even with international journalists, don't you think we could maybe, I guess what I'm hoping to see in this year is maybe a productive move toward educating these journalists through their schools, working with the colleges locally, working with even colleges in the United States and Europe, et cetera, to help them more prepare for something like this. I mean, they don't even offer classes if you want to be a conflict correspondent, or, I mean, it's something that they really shy away from. Then these students come into the fish tank, and then we have a bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger issue. I don't know if anybody's worked on anything like that, working with colleges or anything.
I do a lot of work with that, and it's exactly to your point of what you were saying. I frankly think there should be a statutory obligation for people who are offering journalism courses to incorporate into that a degree of understanding of risk assessment and safety training. And I teach universities across the UK. I do a lot of stuff with the LCC in London. There's almost no one teaching freelancers never mind, how to fill out a risk assessment, what a risk assessment is, why you need it, how the basic steps you can take to work safely and productively on location. It's actually profoundly disturbing.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
I would say I also speak a lot at universities and colleges, and it's the same thing. I mean, it beggars belief. And even, I talk to young journalists, and they talk about, well, how did you get to Afghanistan, or how did you this, or how did you do that? Yeah. And I end up explaining, you're a freelancer. You have to do all of this. I mean, you got to book your flights, you got to sort out your insurance, you got to figure out where you're going to stay. If your guest house gets bombed, you need to figure out where your backup place is going to stay, who's going to drive you, who's going to translate for you, who's going to do security calls. All of this stuff. And I've said it many times before. Some of you may have heard me say this, but all of this work, the military talk about it. They say an amateur talks about tactics and a professional talks about logistics. You need to figure out how you do all these logistics. And then the journalism is sort of an incidental thing that happens along the way. Now, nobody's fucking teaching that in universities, but it's the truth. You got that. And, filling out a security. I mean, I know there's two people who've heard me say this recently, but I had a freelancer who submits to our agency, contacted me recently. I'm going to, I won't say where it was, but I'm going to meet some rebels tomorrow. I was like late at night, I was lying in bed, and I was like, what the fuck? and basically like, who introduced you? Who is the guy? How did you meet him? What's his name? Have you got a photograph? Because I'd like to show it to some people in the same area. I basically did like a 90-minute text message hostile environment course. Right. And it was terrifying. And this guy's smart. He's not an idiot or anything.
So it's more of an issue of responsibility for the freelancer. I mean, a lot of these issues that we're talking about and hashing over and over again is individual responsibility.
Can I just say one other thing? I think that journalists or organizations can take this responsibility as well. And universities will lecture that will all get pissed at me now, but I don't care. But we can take a lot of this away. I'm a great believer in utilizing technology. And I know if a lot of this information can be put online, we could put together a syllabus ourselves and deliver this information to journalists around the world and allow them to learn without having to hand out huge fees. This is stuff that will save your life. You're not going to get an MA at the end of it, I'm sorry, but you know what, who cares?
And what does an MA do nowadays, to be honest? Sorry to all you students.
It gives you a better degree of employment. But you're right, and I agree with a lot of what you're saying there, I must admit. But the thing about putting stuff online is it's a kind of pull mentality. You then have to go and find it and pull it down and look at it. Where if it's an obligation that you are put through it at a class level, you have to sit through it, whether you want to or not. And I just think there needs to be more compulsion.
Yeah, but I think a lot of that can be done with tech as well. You know, there are lots of
so
organisations
make
that require you to
accessible
do
with tech.
training, and you've got to spend 30 minutes on it and answer certain questions before you can move on to the next level. And I think it's not beyond our wits.
Sorry, John.
I want to lead on from this training point because I think there's some challenges we face as freelancers that we all need to address. And I think part of us trying to shape the environment we work in to suit us better and to suit our journalism better, it requires us to make more of an effort ourselves to behave sometimes differently. Now, we all know that out there, not all freelancers are 100% as professional as no doubt we are all here. In fact, there are quite a few who just didn't have enough love as children. The amount of insecurity out there is just staggering. And we
love you.
Well, no. I'm too old to worry about these things. But I tell you, I mean, you know, we may laugh, but actually, in this country particularly, if you go through a list of articles about freelancers, a good third of them, rubbish freelancers, consider us unprofessional and chancers and things like that. And actually, in fairness, some of that label sticks fairly. So what are we going to do about it? Well, this is all part of what we've got to do. Why is FFR trying to push this training qualification thing? We need to, as individuals, demonstrate to the news industry that we are professional. To join FFR, you need to subscribe to certain ethical values of journalism and safety values that determine that, and that's part of its function. We all need to demonstrate to the industry, if we want to get paid properly and want to really properly contribute to journalism the way we feel we are able, that we're competent and behave safely and are responsible. And and where I disagree slightly, interestingly, yeah, we all think we can't work together, and two or three of us have sort of, we've all laughed about how cantankerous and individualistic we're all supposed to be. But in practice, I've found that the whole industry is like that. The industry is full of people who are loners and work for themselves or egocentric and out for number one. I was a soldier once. It's completely different. It was quite a shock to come to journalism. And so, we're all like that. However, we need to demonstrate to the industry, we need to change the way we're perceived, those people who cover conflicts. And you have to do that. You cannot work with people out there who are dangerous. You need to encourage other people to be professional. We have to raise our standard collectively, and we have to work together. And yes, we can work together. We've demonstrated at FFR. The number of freelancers who help other freelancers is phenomenal. We mentor each other more than the rest of the industry does. So I actually slightly challenge the idea that we can't work together. We are working together, and we can and must do, and we must shape this industry, and that means changing ourselves as well.
But are we speaking enough to the public? I mean, for me, what surprises me is the way that we are very bad at communicating to the public the way we work and the conditions under which we work. And so there's no pressure at all on of course, you have to make separation in the news industry. You have decent news organization that we try to the best, and then you have lousy organization. It's not the industry versus the freelancers. They have really different ways. You have some news organizations that are absolutely decent, but sometimes when I go to schools or sort of like the conferences, normal public, not journalists, not freelancers, just and telling them how I work, on how the people that I know work as journalists, they are shocked, and they say, "Oh, now I understand why you are so bad." And so, basically, it's the lack of pressure, of the public pressure on some media owners. The fact that you name and shame them might help, perhaps, to some extent, to force them to at least accept the basic principles, the basic standards that other news organizations that have their standards have been applying it. They're talking to us. But I think we have a problem with communicating our own fate, if I may say, to the larger public in a way which would rebound on the industry.
In a positive way.
Yeah,
Because
exactly,
I feel
yeah.
the only time you hear about freelancers are usually not good times to hear about freelancers
Yeah.
in the public. So how do you suggest we do that, if you have any ideas toward representing ourselves to a public, to where publications and everybody will wake up and go, hey, we should pay these people, they're professional, they're responsible, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, like,
But it's more
How do you-
complicated than that, because
Oh,
we
I'm
also
sure.
we also have to champion ourselves as freelancers. Because the truth is, you go out somewhere as a freelancer, you shoot some amazing footage which a news organization buys from you, and then they win multiple awards from it, and they describe it as their film, and they describe you as their journalist. And the truth is, it's really fucking hard to say anything about that because you want to keep getting the work.
Exactly.
But you know, we need to shout. You know, but of course, then if we get in trouble, or we get arrested, we get shot or something. It's like, oh, well, that's a freelancer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's like Barry McGuigan, the great British boxer.
But it's also very to turn to turn the event of the 3rd of May, for instance, which is the World Press Freedom Day, which usually is being held among ourselves, among journalists, to turn it into a public event. For instance, in Brussels, we have last year we had an event, and we have a second year. Second year will happen today. This year, we organize it with. In the Beaux-Arts, which is nothing to do with journalism, we invite artists, intellectuals, citizens. We try to open up to the population and make sure that press freedom is not just for journalists, it's for the public, it's for the citizens. So to create that constituency that we have lost, because as you know, I mean, our profession, and I love that profession, I have to say, is the worst. I mean, we are. You know, if you know, I would say, you know, don't tell my mom I'm a journalist. She believes that I'm a gangster. You know, so it's really the kind of it's tragic to see how low we are, and if we don't explain ourselves, if we allow people to say those journalists are shit because they're inaccurate, they're lousy, they're sensationalists, although majority of people in our trade try to do the best they can, if we don't prove that, we don't have the power, the leverage. To improve our fate and the fate of freelancers in particular.
I just think
One
it's-
last thing, and then
it's
we're gonna
very
go to
difficult.
Q&A.
Again, it's very difficult because we're all conditioned, or most of us are conditioned, not to talk about ourselves, not putting ourselves in the story, and we have to try and differentiate. I think. Well, you know, there are a few people who will stand up and say, "No shit, here I am," but most of us, you know, are conditioned, you know, to deliver other people's stories, not our own. And as a result, we are quite crap at talking about the work that we do. I mean, it still has to be separated, but I agree, we have got to get, as an industry, we've got to get better at telling people what we do and the challenges we face and the risks we take to deliver their news.
So right now I'd like to, I'm actually going to jump in where you guys are, get off this hot table. And I'd like to ask you guys if you have any questions for these panelists that would throw your hands up in the air. Like you just don't care. All right, here we go. There you go.
I actually got two questions. One question is, do you think that crowdfunding has got any role in solving the pay problem with freelance journalists? I'm not a journalist, I'm actually a lawyer in legal aid area, and I know that some, with the recent cut, some lawyers have started crowdfunding for pro bono cases that otherwise wouldn't get funded. Do you think that could be something that your industry might be looking at? And my second question is slightly off. Sorry, can I ask two questions? Sorry. Yeah.
Go ahead, guys.
I jump in directly
Go for
because we, as Warzone Freelance Exhibition, we did a crowdfunding and we are doing again one. So it didn't turn out that good as we hoped, but it garnered support. And you know, later on, because of Frontline Club giving us the space, etc., it turned out well. But it gave us, the opportunity to show already what we want to do, bring it out into the social media, and exactly then get the organizations on board. So it helps definitely, but on a more pessimistic side, I think, because it's done already since several years, like it got big probably 2010, 11, 12 or something, tons of journalists try to crowdfund nowadays. And as there are more and more who try to use that tool, of course, often it's getting like smaller and smaller than mounds spread all over it. And then you have a kind of fatigue sometimes in the people to crowdfund nowadays even. So it was a great way. Sometimes it works out, but it can't be the solution.
And it also seems, I just want to throw in something about crowdfunding. It also seems that, like with most social media today, people like ourselves are adapting with these social medias to use them for different types of motives, like informational and spreading the word about an organization, not just just to raise money as well. So I think people are kind of adapting with the social media. So I just want to throw that in. Anybody else?
Hi, my name is Gloria Skolaim. I'm a filmmaker. Actually, my question is, as you said, the industry is not always the case that they commission you first and then you go to any war zone, any situation. When I made a film last time for Al Jazeera, I was in the border with Congo, but they knew where I was. There was this sense of the security. I was freelance, but they knew where I was. I had to touch base with the commissioner every 2 days. But what would be the solution when you have to go out there because you want to be exposed to the story, but then you have no idea, if anything happens to you, only your family would know, and they don't know where to go, because you're not supported by any organization, you're not supported by any channel, and you don't know whether you put yourself in this danger, whether you have an audience for it even tomorrow.
Well, I just quickly respond to that. I mean, there's two distinct things there. The first thing is understanding how a communications protocol works is something that all journalists working in hostile environments should understand. It's something that's very easy to teach. It should be part of academic courses globally, and it's something that is available online and should be more available online. And in the absence of a commissioner-journalist relationship, this is an exceptionally good example of how informal networks amongst journalists can work, because you might not be part of the frontline register, you might not have a relationship with anything formally, but you will have friends and family that you can communicate with, that you can check in with, that you can have an agreed structure of communicating with, so that if something does happen, they know when it's happened and where it's happened. So that's key. I do that for a lot of my mates who are out traveling, who are uncommissioned freelancers. It's completely separate to Channel 4. So that's a really good example of how freelancers can build their own informal networks to make that work. We all know the stories of people realizing that a freelance journalist had been kidnapped because he doesn't turn up to someone's birthday party. It's like, oh, and by that point, it's too late to do anything meaningful. But on the commissioner relationship, I feel very strongly that commissioners need to behave extremely responsibly towards filmmakers in hostile environments. I'm either going to commission you to go and you'll get the full backing of what we are doing, of the organisation, or I'm not.
But that's why people commission less, because they don't want to get in themselves into those situations as a channel, because they don't want to be responsible. Because if you commission me first, then you are to some extent responsible.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think and rightly so, and rightly responsible.
They rarely commission these days because they want that bit of the, they prefer to get the footage.
This is what I'm talking about. You need, you can't blame the news channel. I'll blame them for lots of things, but you can't blame them for this because if there are less commissions, we all know it. There is a higher risk. James and his colleagues have to comply with a mountain of rules, and their hands are tied. What can they do? So it's up to us. We have to learn how to do this. And if you're going to, if you're going somewhere that's dangerous, you better have a communication plan. And I would say, actually, I have done this for many years, and my girlfriend, who became my fiance, who's now my wife, has been my security manager for years, and is far more effective than any organisation I worked with, because she has a vested interest in me turning up, or at least knowing that I'm dead, so she can give me insurance.
She also has a vested interest in knowing where you are all the time.
But seriously, this is another part of what I'm talking about, these logistics. There's no point in saying, and I'm not saying you, I'm just saying in general in the industry, there's no point in saying, oh, well, no one will give me a commission, so, poor me. It's like, fuck it, suck it up. You got to figure out how to do this and learn how to do it safely. And, and I'm telling you, if you are able to, do this properly, look after yourself, after a while, you won't want the commissions, because you'll have more freedom to work on your own.
Any other questions? Hold on one second.
First of all, the Frontline Freelance Register tackled or just trying to tackle the delayed payment problem. I saw some organizations in the list that I remember not getting paid by that quickly, so I'm curious how it will pan out. But another issue that pretty much all the freelancers that I know have dealt with is that you're pitching a story to an organization, they're interested, they want more information, you want to give them more information because you really want to make that story, and you're trying to draw a line, but they keep fishing, and in the end they go and make it themselves, and there goes your story. But like, I could imagine that you could sort of make a contract about something like that as well. Like someone pitches you a story and you say, oh, but we're making that ourselves already, please don't tell us anymore, try it somewhere else, thank you very much. But if there will be a certain amount of emails and questions asked where they would actually agree to say, okay, we did fuck you over, and we will pay you a part for that because we didn't get away with it and you found out. But like, yeah, I don't know any freelancer that has not dealt with it, and I know of an agency that actually stopped pitching stories to media because they would all get stolen, so they just started commissioning or paying for it themselves. I think it's a huge issue.
On FFR's codes of conduct, it mentions both these points. If a broadcaster or was going to uphold our standards we require at FFR, then they wouldn't be able to steal your stories, and they'd have to pay you in a reasonable time. However, the world isn't perfect. Look, ultimately, there are an awful lot of niggling, annoying problems we have to deal with, and it's a bad world out there. I still feel that the strategy is to have a voice and to say what we want, because we haven't had that voice, and we haven't said what we want in a coherent way enough. And also to improve our skills so that as we become more professional, more skilled, demonstrably so, with qualifications where possible, we up our value and we up our authority as journalists. And all these things, in time, perhaps we will be able to get, you'll have, certain contractual norms that will exist simply because of, we've all upped our game sufficiently and asked and spoken and met and arranged these things. But it'll take a few years, I think.
Just to throw into that question, what happens if someone doesn't comply to those safety principles? Like,
well, at the moment, nothing. They're just at the moment they're a guide. They're the view that the people running FFR have scribbled it down and said, look, this is what it should be like. We've tried to make it reasonable and sensible, and so that it reads to the industry as something they could one day subscribe to. But it takes time. And we need support. I mean, we need people to support us to be able to do these things.
I also think it's really important that it doesn't turn into a battle between freelancers and media outlets, because that doesn't fucking help anybody. And actually, we can't all work here.
So strike is out of the question.
Yeah.
There is some anger, though.
No,
some people are pretty.
I've been out there for a long time, and believe me, I know. But I also think, God, I sound like an adult. I also think that it's far better for for us to try and work on this and work together. And the FFR is doing great work. It really is. We don't tell people enough about what we're doing, which is, it is the biggest failing of the FFR without doubt. But yeah. we're talking to an awful lot of people on a range of issues, and I just think every time I sit down with somebody, I've been working on an insurance project for 2 years. It's still not done. But and there are an awful lot of other people working on this as well, and we will eventually get there.
But what you have to remember is our value to journalism is rising exponentially, I would argue, because the industry is getting hammered by corporate responsibility in covering conflicts, and that we don't necessarily fit within. And so you either view that as an incredible competitive advantage, though obviously it's risky, or something. But the fact is, there are always going to be competent people prepared to go to places, and that's us lot. As that value becomes clear, as we communicate our value to journalism, what the problem is that broadcasters and news organisations, they're businesses of some sort. They don't really have an interest in promoting the fact they've bought their stuff from a freelancer. It doesn't promote that they're covering the world themselves, does it? So, in a sense, they disguise it. You know, a reporter at a news organisation is really a brand representative of that organisation. You are not a brand representative of someone else's organisation. So, you know, they, in a sense, what's actually happening is, to an extent, they are in the way between you and the audience. If you sell through them, you may not get all the editorial control or influence you need. There are all sorts of potential issues there that have always existed. But as we communicate our value, which underpins the importance of communicating to the public, to the audience, who's doing this? We have to be doing that online. We have to be explaining ourselves. All of that, as we do it, will increase our worth. You know, we should you know, improve things.
Ben Wilson. Anybody else? Hold on one second. I feel like a bald Geraldo Rivera over here. Here we go. Here we go.
Hello, thank you for that. I have an observation and a question. My observation is that as journalists, obviously, your role is to give voice to people who don't have a voice. And it's kind of funny to hear that you guys don't have a voice and you're struggling to give yourselves one. And my question is, in any freelance industry, it's quite difficult to get that job and get it paid. But if you're, for example, a freelance accountant, you pretty much know what you're worth. Is part of the issue as a freelance war journalist, it's hard to kind of either monetize what you're worth. And is it there's some sort of moral obligation to release the photos regardless anyway?
I think as journalists, we're there primarily to report. I think freelancers have a calling. Most freelancers I meet have a sort of calling for journalism, and so yeah, absolutely, I would certainly report regardless if I could. The problem is you need to fund the next trip. You need to, you know, you can't live on nothing.
But I also think that there are lots of, particularly photographers, as a photojournalist, I can say, there are lots of us who will have published work. If we couldn't sell it, we won't have given it away for free, and I've often turned down shitty offers of money and say, I would rather publish this for free to ensure that it gets out in the end. But that's, you know, we're still a business as well, and we're still trying to pay our bills and make sure we can go and do the next story.
My point is that, is it, sorry, thank you. I think my point is more that, is it that people bank on the fact that you will do that, therefore they aren't, you know, prepared to pay that much? Because they expect you to do it anyway.
I think the slight elephant in the room here is that we have also to deal with an issue of just basic capitalism. It's a supply and demand issue. 30 years ago, when I was working in Liberia, how many people were there filming the war in northern Liberia? One, me. How many would there be now? Hey, you know, to buy a plane ticket from London, to fly down to Gaziantep, to get down to the border, and it's a few £100, a broadcast quality camera. I have one in my pocket, it's my iPhone. You know? So the sheer volume of people who are presenting themselves as freelance journalists in a conflict scenario has grown exponentially. The number of outlets, traditional paying outlets, has diminished. And then there's the internet, which we all think is kind of wonderful on the one hand, but aren't really quite sure how we're going to make a sustainable living out of it, especially for this number of people. So, in a sense, the traditional purchasers of news media are in a very comfortable position. Have a very large number of people in a very small pool producing quite similar material, and that depresses prices. So there's a point at which I believe the majority of journalists that go to difficult places do so because they are moved by the story. I have also had the extreme displeasure of working alongside a number of war tourists. And it is very easy to be a war tourist with an iPhone and a cheap plane ticket. And that is something, that's that small minority of people that we need to...
Except that I don't think they're a small minority. But
well, actually, yes, there's...
you know, I referred to them earlier. I mean, and I think they pose a problem to those who take the professional seriously too. And we need to manage that because they get reported and we get associated with them. And that's one of the functions of FFR, is to allow people to separate themselves, because inherently it's a statement of commitment.
Oh, all the way back there. I'm coming. one second.
I just have a question about payment, going back to the issue of payment. Have you heard of like Story Hunter, where it's like a platform of where you, basically. What's your thoughts about that? Because I've had like a payment from AP, and it's a year and a half later, and I'm only getting paid now. So to fund my trips, like it's impossible. And now, like when I do anything for AJ Plus, it all goes through Story Hunter. And even though I'm directly like in contact with like the commissioner, we put it on Story Hunter later, but now they're charging me things.
There's no excuse for it.
A year late.
There's no excuse. You know, like I said earlier, at Verified Media, we get our clients to pay on the day, we pay you the next day. It's fucking easy. There's no excuse, and I have been through this. I've been through this for years. 2 years ago, I walked away from my career and I was doing really, really well. And I left it all to set this up because I was so sick of how the industry was being destroyed by organizations like that. There is no excuse for not being paid. I mean, 30 days, okay, you know, you wait 30 days. But, you know, you should also, I mean, but, you know, it's down to you as well. You need to make, you know, it's down to all of you. What I'm saying is it's down to all of you to make sure that your contract's in place. You know, if you're going away somewhere, you should be getting a certain amount of money up front. But if you're funding it yourself, you need to make sure you get paid either before you hand it over or...
It can be expenses as well, can't it? You see, that's the thing. It can be not just your payment for the trip, it can be the expenses of the whole trip. Sometimes you don't get for months and months. The New York Times have a policy of paying after 6 months. A policy of 6 months, interestingly. That's the New York Times. I know this is a grievous matter, but at the same time, I think part of it, you have to understand the industry. It's simply not geared to pay people quickly because it hasn't been pressured properly to. It isn't geared to, they don't have the mechanisms. I mean, you can't buy some footage on your credit card, on the company card.
But you can, they can.
You can, but you have to pressure, you have to pressure.
But they say, we can't do it, we can't do it, we can't do it. And then you have something that they really want, and lo and behold, a credit card is found in the office.
Oh, really?
What type of pressure would they need?
Well, I mean, because I'm trying to promote FFR, aren't we, though? You know, I would say that, you know, collective pressure. But I just think the more we complain about it, and you know, I think in the news industry, what you've got to remember is that it's populated by a lot of sharks and a lot of very decent people. And I think we all need to be appealing to all those decent, reasonable people who don't understand how their organizations that employ them are treating you. And if they did, I think the pressure for change of behavior is possible. And I think one of the ways with the news industry is to communicate in a reasonable way to as many decent, reasonable people that you meet who are employed and say, did you know that this happens? And if we can get enough people on side, behavior will change.
Hiya. Do you have any thoughts on young people perhaps considering going into war zones for the first time? Obviously, you've mentioned safety training and all of those things, but my experience, based on working with some big organisations, is that, say, even those when they're late 20s or early 30s who might be sent, eventually as a staff or even freelance conflict VJ or reporter, would have taken some form of risk early on in their career by themselves and made themselves vulnerable. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts on whether that was right or whether that needs to change, and if so, how, and what you advise for people like me who might want to do that one day.
For a small question. I find myself in the strange position of, as a 43-year-old commissioning editor, would not commission my 28-year-old self. So, which is a deeply confusing thing for me personally, and I hopefully the therapy will pay off.
A load of my friends who've done it have, when they were, whether it be in Ukraine or, somewhere in Kyrgyzstan, they put themselves at risk when they were, say, about 26, 7, and then, then they got their respect, but they were also all men. That's the other thing. So I kind of...
Yes, I mean, just to very, very quickly, so first on the men issue, I mean, the demographic of this room tells you a lot about where the industry's going. Second, as does the composition of almost any photojournalism course in the UK, you look at any production office in the UK, I mean, fine, there is a gender balance that's being rapidly improved. My general feeling about young people who say they want to go to war zones is a bit like a sort of ancient Greek philosophy of people who want to enter politics. Absolutely every conceivable obstacle should be put in their way. And only the people who really, 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 truly, genuinely want to do it end up going there. And I think for me that is an inbuilt revulsion of the war tourist. And unfortunately those obstacles are becoming fewer and not more difficult. For me the key thing is that my personal advice just for people, younger people who want to go into the industry, apart from don't, is straightforwardly, is understand why it is you want to do it. Really, truly interrogate your motivations for wanting to do it. Because understanding your motivation is the key determinant of risk. Is how you approach your job, the risks you take for yourself and other people will entirely depend on why you want to do the work in the first place. And secondly, you may not have the luxury of a nice university course to go to that teaches you things. You may not have many other friends in the industry, but as we're saying, there exists online already a vast amount of material that can help you with safely planning trips. So if you are going to go, there is no longer any excuse for not finding the material to help you to do it. And you know, worst case scenario, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people up on this panel who will help you. And then I'm sure there are a number of other people in this room as well that will give you advice too.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, just one thing. I mean, we have to. I mean, I'm absolutely convinced that we have to train journalists on safety issues, on dangerous assignments. But at the same time, one of the best ways also, and it's not one against the other, it's one with the other, to protect yourself is to know the story, to know the country, to know the culture, to know where you are going, and make a distinction between the various factions, understand the history. Why is it that some organizations like, for instance, Human Rights Watch, they go to the worst countries in the world in terms of violence? There are very few cases that I remember that they have been put under pressure or they've been taken hostage, because the level of knowledge about the situation in the country protects them. And one of the things that I've seen myself as an editor-in-chief is quite often I had young journalists that had even gone through dangerous assignments training, hostile environment training. They were, I mean, they knew to recognize a landmine from a bazooka, if I may say. Huh? But at the same time, they didn't know anything about the diversity of cultures. They went to Iraq and said, oh, the Sunnis and the Shia. It's just basic. I mean, it's just the, no, it's much more complex than that. So I think one of the things that we have to be aware of is, apart from training journalists on safety, on physical protection, on first aid, which is absolutely essential, and I really thank the organization been working on this. They've been saving hundreds of lives already. At the same time, we have to go back to some form of journalism where knowledge is part of the assignment.
And responsibility too.
Just 1-2 sentences on that. Like an example, I started out with the Kurdish question in 2008. I wanted one topic: Turkey, Iraq, Iran, Syria. I'm still there. That's my main thing. I don't parachute into war. Sometimes here and there I do other stuff. It doesn't pay off. In the first years, nobody was interested. Like in 2008, who was interested in 30-year-old conflict in Turkey? But I know the area. I have the contacts. I built up my network in all of those 4 countries. In the beginning, I started small, and then it got bigger and bigger. But I know halfway the language. I need to retrain it again. But that's, if you focus on something and choose something and stick to that, then you can avoid a lot of the problems. It doesn't make you like the guy who jumps over the girl from one place to the next and flies through the bullet from the front lines, but that's not the issue. You want to cover one topic and that thoroughly and understand it.
I know some of you guys got to go, but can we get one more question? Sorry. Okay. One was it? I saw your hand up.
One of my questions was about developing the training side for FFR, because there is a myriad of different courses out there, particularly in hostile environment training, from the very, very good ones that are run by SAS who do escorting in war zones of journalists, to I think the most terrifying description of a course where they were actually proud that some people had a nervous breakdown during a hostage reenactment scene, which I just thought, I don't think I'll bother with that. But it could sound very seductive to somebody who's a bit more naive. Is that part of the development plan of the professionalising?
Yes, the training program that I'm hoping to launch within a month or two has taken 18 months so far. It's been so complicated to get the feedback from over 100 different sources, 100 either organizations or broadcasters or other news organizations who want to impact it. All the training outfits that are, the good training outfits there have been consulted and had their feed in, and we've come up with a syllabus that's going to sort of work. It's been a nightmare. Anyway, we're finally going to draw a line under it and launch it, and I think we'll be able to launch it with 30, 40 organizations supporting it. Now, the sort of training you're talking about, fortunately, doesn't really exist in a good organization, won't give you that sort of trauma. And actually, that's kind of the sort of thing that was really done about 15 years ago. And actually, if you look at the people that have been training journalists in this country, where the training really originated in this country, and it was ex-soldiers who did it. In fact, the first course was in 1993 in June, and I was a consultant to it by an outfit that still exists called AKE, who does CNN, I think now. Now, the courses are pretty good, and actually what's come out is quite similar to what we started with. There will be a course for conflict, a course for just difficult, dangerous but not warlike countries. And we were going to include, and it's something I think is worth pointing out, a mandatory day annual refresher for first aid. But we're probably going to pull that because freelancers said we simply can't afford it, and the industry doesn't make itself do that. Why do we set a higher standard? And so we're probably going to pull that, but I'd like to put it back in when I can. And I think it does, there's something that's changed in training. Only a decade ago, you would hear people say, oh, I don't need training, I'm very experienced, and that would wash with quite a few people. But now, that doesn't wash. In fact, I don't think it's acceptable. I don't think anybody should be there without first aid. Nobody should be there, full stop. And if you meet someone out there who hasn't got a first aid course, they're not going to be able to look after you if you're in a car with them if you get hit. So don't go with them. And again, this goes into my point of we have to maintain and set, freelancers out there need to set the standards for some of these people coming in. They're the people, they look to you. Oh, you've been doing it for a year or two. How do you behave? Oh, well, I'll behave like that, responsibly, safely, things like that. We've got to set the example to others. But yes, what we're going to have is this qualification. You'll be able to get probably with 10 or 20 trainers. It will be recognised by the core industry and hopefully in time everybody. And it is very much part of this professional development that I think we need to be going on to be able to say to people, look, I'm a professional, I've got qualifications, I deserve to be paid properly.
At the moment, the hostile environment security training industry is almost entirely unregulated, and therefore you have a very wide divergence of what's available. And the same is true of almost every kind of training or teaching environment. The instruction that you get is only going to be as good as the teachers or trainers who are delivering it. So making sure that those people are credible and competent is important. And yes, there are a lot of ex-military who give training. A lot of them are very good. A lot of them really aren't. There's a real limit to what Sergeant Ginger from A Squadron can tell me about working as a journalist, frankly speaking. And I think also a move in the training industry and hostile environments training towards experienced journalists working as trainers inside of the industry is key, because it's again going back to that idea of motivation being a key determiner of risk. That's what Sergeant Ginge isn't going to get his head around. I would say that the point at which in Syria I'm sitting in a room while we've got JDAMs going off at the end of the street with like 5 freelancers who've never had medical training, don't have any kit, and me and my medic are giving an impromptu hostile environments medical course. And it's absurd. I mean, it's completely absurd. How we got to that point, it's beggars belief. So I think, and for me personally, Vaughan hit the nail on the head. Is I know I'm very well trained. I've done this for my whole professional life. I'm great, but if I'm in a vehicle, I want to know that he can do it too, right? Because and it's self-interest, and that's the key bit that seems to have eluded freelance consciousness. Is that it's not just about you, it's about people being able to look after you in that sense, which is key. And I really hope that the FFR does bring back a one-day refresher as a mandatory part of it, because frankly speaking, I'd rather you've done a one-day refresher course than you've done a whole hostile environments course.
And I will also say that training, if you ever get offered it, you take it. And sometimes it's a pain in the ass because it's a week that you'd like to be working, or it isn't. But and I've done this course many times, and I've spent God knows how long with the military, and any downtime I have, I will ask for a refresher course. And we used to practice sticking needles in each other's to get an IV in, and 3 years ago, I had my daughter was 3 days old, and she choked. She was only just home from the hospital, and she stopped breathing in front of me. And my wife had cesarean, so she could barely move. And I managed to get her breathing before the paramedics arrived, and they arrived in 4 minutes. And it was incredible. I think the training just goes in and it stays in. I think if we can do it every year, it would be brilliant. But anytime you get an opportunity, anytime you get it, because you may not use it in Afghanistan or Iraq or Syria or Ukraine, you might use it here when somebody chokes in a pool.
So the Channel 4 at the moment runs a training scheme for investigative journalism, and we take on about 10 trainees a year, and a mandatory part of that training course is 1 day of hostile environments medical training. Which
Channel 4 paid for my first hostile environment course, so maybe you saved my daughter.
There you go.
But on this, interestingly, they've done some research on training and what bits people remember. And actually, it's the medical that people forget, because it's the practical. You normally train on various models and things like that. People feel nervous about it if they haven't done it, because they forget, oh, what have I got to do? Breathing, bleeding, this, that, the other, and all of that. And so actually, it really is important to keep up on those skills. So we plan to keep it as a recognisable thing. Ideally, the whole industry will move to a mandatory refresher on first aid annually for people who go to conflicts. That's what's needed. That's where this has to go. Now, whether the freelancers should be taking a lead, which is an interesting concept, I don't know. But at the moment, we can't afford it. It will be there so that people who have done it will be able to display it. But it won't be initially mandatory to receive, the kind of the card that allows you to, go where you want to go.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out. That's the end of this discussion. I appreciate it. Thank you to our panelists.